Speaking and spoken interaction, that's the theme for today, and it's at the heart of language education and assessment and of everything that we do in Wales. For us, creating Welsh speakers, new Welsh speakers, is at the heart of the whole endeavour. Speaking and interacting with other speakers is the main focus of teaching Welsh, as you heard from Helen, as it is in our exams in the assessments. So Helen has given us a picture of the context, and you heard from the Minister about the policy as well. I'm going to focus on our speaking tests and highlight some issues which may be of interest to ALTE delegates and the people from Wales who are invited guests here today. Learning to speak a language which is only spoken by a minority of people has its own challenges, as does developing tests where candidate numbers, as you heard from Helen, are inevitably small. There are always challenges to find raters, interlocutors. However, I'm always grateful to the many tutors who give of their time to engage with this assessment work on top of what they already do year after year. It's fair to say, I think there's a sense of stewardship which drives many of us in the language education sector. And I think you sensed that sense of stewardship certainly in Helen's talk as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our tests. All the slides will be available afterwards with some references at the end, which you may find useful. Okay, a lightning tour of our tests. These are the highlights. So we provide a suite of 4 exams from A1 to B2. All speaking tests are recorded and assessed externally by trained raters. Tests are double marked independently at B1 and B2, but at A1 and A2 they are moderated. A large sample is moderated by the principal examiner. And we have around 1,500 candidates per year taking the tests. As you heard, the breakdown from Helen, most at A1 level, which is a pattern we are eager to change. And the candidates, to give an idea of the nature of the candidates, they're adult learners of Welsh, mostly attending the Learn Welsh courses provided through the National Centre for Learning Welsh, which you heard about. So the weighting for the speaking and spoken interaction is comparatively high. Looking around at tests of other ALTE members, it's interesting to note maybe they're fairly equally weighted. Well, for us, speaking and spoken interaction, that counts for 50% or around 50% of the total marks for all the levels, actually. There are slight variations within those. So the amount of marks allocated for speaking and spoken interaction reflects what happens in the teaching. That's generally the amount of time allocated for those skills in the language classrooms. And there's a strong emphasis on using Welsh. In other words, speaking Welsh outside the classroom is really important. The generic name for this suite of tests is Defnyddio'r Gymraeg, using Welsh. We want our exams to have an impact, so this really is a vital consideration. Since the pandemic, there has been an option for candidates to take the speaking test only, and they can carry this mark forward for 1 year to complete the qualification in the next session, if they so wish. It's a fairly complex thing to set up, but I think now exam centres and interlocutors, they're familiar with using digital recorders, uploading sound files to be assessed by someone else. Of course, during the pandemic, only online speaking tests were available, so centres learned pretty quickly how to do everything online. But since then, I think it's fair to say there's been a definite shift in favour of face-to-face speaking tests. All our candidates have an opportunity to send feedback after the exam, and as adult learners, they usually have plenty to say. And here are some typical responses to the speaking test. In the time that we were emerging from COVID, online works well, but face-to-face has a much bigger impact and is much more akin to real-life experience. I would prefer face-to-face always because I find it easier to remember what someone said with accompanying visual setting. So these are candidate comments, not our decisions, as it were. So in terms of the candidate experience and the interlocutor experience, don't forget that, and face-to-face offers many positives. Those benefits may be intangible at times, but in terms of candidate performance and how raters respond to those performances, it's difficult to say if there is any measurable difference in our case. All our speaking tests have always been recorded and assessed externally, even in the primitive pre-digital age when we used cassettes and cassette recorders. So we don't have experience of live in-person assessment. And it's interesting to speculate whether Zoom or Teams recordings, where raters can see the candidate, change the scoring. And some raters reported that they enjoyed the visual element, being able to see how much communication was supported by facial expressions and gestures. And the scores, when all speaking tests were online back in 2021, so the summer of 21, the scores were generally higher. So, audio recordings are maybe more objective, more reliable, and certainly easier to manage, so there are advantages as well. There's no one correct way to do speaking tests. With online tests, even with near perfect sound quality and a perfect connection, there's always a slight delay and a slight uncertainty involved in turn-taking. But there's no doubt, I mean, online is part of our lives. It certainly reflects real language use nowadays, certainly. At B2 level, one section of our speaking test requires the interlocutor to interact with the candidate in order to discuss a topical issue. And perhaps online doesn't work quite as well in that kind of setup. Some interlocutors found it difficult to interrupt, to find a suitable moment, to interject, to take discussion in a different direction. When face-to-face, the signals and opportunities to do this are, of course, much clearer. And there's some research published on this topic, thanks to Tony Green for sending these to me. And one study, which I think our colleague Linda Taylor here contributed to as well, looked at rater responses to candidate speaking tests, comparing scores given to live performances, audio only, and rating video recordings of IELTS speaking tests. And the analysis showed that across all the criteria, audio-only ratings were significantly lower than the live or video ratings. So that sort of reflects our experience as well. Raters empathize more when they can see the candidate. I think these are issues which affect all speaking tests, however large or small the language and the candidatures. So what, therefore, of our assessment criteria? Well, for the most part, there's nothing unusual about them. The aspects of spoken language we assess reflect the qualitative features of the CEFR, lexical and grammatical range, accuracy, pronunciation, fluency. There is or has been in the past a tendency among tutors to focus on accuracy to the detriment of the other features. Is this possibly a feature common to less widely tested languages? Do we want to defend the perceived quality of both spoken and written language more than others, possibly? I think the attitude of, if it's not good Welsh, it's not worth saving, I think that attitude has thankfully disappeared, to mostly anyway, perhaps hasn't disappeared entirely. Then again, looking at tests for other languages, we see that even the bigger languages give an even greater focus to accuracy and correct language use than we do. So maybe it's not just a feature of lesser used languages. Using the CEFR to inform the development of the tests certainly has been helpful. It's enabled us and encouraged other people to focus more on how learners use their Welsh. And I always remember one colleague, ALTE colleague, from Catalonia, when we were discussing this topic at an ALTE meeting, telling me we've moved away from considering how well they speak the language to focus on what they can do with the language. So that was quite an instructive conversation for me, certainly. And the CEFR was also useful when developing tests which would elicit actual spoken interaction, which is more elusive than we might think. Okay, what do we mean by spoken interaction? So this is the CEFR definition. In interactive activities, the language user acts alternately as a speaker and listener with one or more interlocutors so as to construct conjointly, through the negotiation of meaning, following the cooperative principle, conversational discourse. But, there's a lot to unpick in that definition. But you could infer that discourse, conversation, is always a structured, orderly activity, whereas interaction, true interaction, is, of course, unpredictable and, for want of a better word, messy. And this conflicts, of course, with our instincts for order and for features that we can match neatly with our assessment criteria. Also, candidates want to script their own speaking tests beforehand. And this can be an issue for speaking tests. There was an interesting study published by Ofqual in 2019 on modern languages in schools in England. A study, I think, which our ALTE colleague Jane Lloyd contributed to as well. It's entitled Investigating Standards in GCSE French, German and Spanish through the lens of the CEFR. And the study pointed to the difficulty of finding real evidence to show that candidates were actually interacting. So the assessments, this is from the report, the assessment themselves provide little evidence of some of the skills essential for communicative language competence, such as ability to engage in meaningful interaction. The evidence was just not there. Scripted and learned responses are almost always easy to spot, especially in spoken interaction. Okay, it's easy to criticize other people's tests, maybe, but the same issue did slowly affect our own speaking test at A2, when candidates and tutors came to realize that the limited topics in the tests, what they were likely to be, many would be ready with a pre-learnt long turn, and any responses or follow-up questions then, or any intervention by the interlocutor, that would be at a slightly different level. It was becoming more of a memorization test rather than a speaking test. So, as practitioners, we had to address this. So the format of the test was changed to elicit what we hoped was more, to emulate at least genuine interaction, and to enable the learner to show that they can do the relevant descriptor of the CEFR. So this is what the CEFR says at the higher A2 level. Can interact with reasonable ease in structured situations and short conversations, provided the other person helps if necessary. Can manage simple routine exchanges without undue effort. Can ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on familiar topics in predictable, everyday situations. So in the revised A2 speaking test, part 1 requires the candidate to ask questions, to fill information gaps in an advertisement. Part 2 is the long turn, where they talk about a topic, their own experiences related to 5 topics, and the interlocutor then, there's a follow-up or intervention questions as well. But part 3, the candidate is required to ask the interlocutor about one of those topics that they've just been talking about. And this was the surprising section of the test for me. The amount of interacting that even weaker candidates managed, it was quite unexpected in a way. I was quite worried about that section. But eventually, candidates would, features of actual spoken interaction were emerging. Candidates using strategies like back-channeling, using fillers, reformulating. So there was, at last, some genuine interaction going on. Okay, my time is running out rather quickly. I did mention the CEFR alignment review that we undertook last year, led by Professor Tony Green. The initial work was done 10 years previously, so this was slightly overdue. I'm happy to share the report with anybody who's interested. But to cut a long story short, the conclusions did confirm more or less that they were at the level that we said they were. So it's always a good thing to step back and ask, why do we use the CEFR? It's a question that Waldeck, Professor Martiniuk, always tells us to ask. For me, it's the CEFR linking is a quality improvement exercise. Our exams are better because of the CEFR. Of course, it's part of the ALTE audit, as most of us here know. But being able to claim that your exams correspond to the levels gives your qualifications a certain currency and gives them a perceived status which they may not otherwise have. And that may be more relevant or important for lesser used languages. To end, I finished my talk in 2005 with this quotation. It sort of sums up why assessment can have an impact. It's from a candidate questionnaire. It still summarizes why exams matter. People started taking me seriously as a learner when they knew I was taking an exam. Assessment can and does have a positive impact. Adding the CEFR and exams that have been audited by an international organization like ALTE make the teaching, learning and assessment of Welsh a serious endeavour. Diolch yn fawr. I think my time is very much up. Okay. Diolch yn fawr.